Hello and a very warm welcome back to Widowed AF. Today I am joined by somebody who you would probably describe as grief adjacent. Poppy Mardell is not a member of our club, but she has dealt with many of us. Poppy is a funeral director, and she's known for kind of challenging assumptions around funerals and encouraging people to create farewells that feel personal and meaningful and, above all, kind of honest and authentic. So whether you have experienced bereavement yourself or you simply want to think differently about how we do funerals, then this should be a really interesting conversation for you. So before I go any further, let's say a very warm welcome to Poppy Mardell. Hello, Poppy.
Hello, Rosie. Thank you so
You're
much for
so
having me here.
welcome. Poppy, I have got a lot of questions for you, okay? And I think the kind of the one that's pressing on me the most is it's a very much a man's world, funerals. I don't think I've ever come across a female funeral director. And I'm picturing you as a little girl growing up and thinking, what do I want to do with my life? When did funeral director appear on your radar?
Very late, and maybe even a little I almost had to psych myself up.
Yeah.
And actually, we did a vote the other day in the Poppy's teams. There's about 25 of us to say who here ever wanted to be a funeral director.
Nobody.
And absolutely nobody put up their hands.
It's not your go-to career choice, is it? But when we think about it, and I'm thinking, the audience we're talking to today, almost every single person listening will have had some interaction with a funeral director. It's a job that is vital. It's always going to be needed. So yeah, was there a kind of a life event or anything that made you look differently at this?
Yeah, I think so. I actually started my career in the art world. I was an expert at some auction houses, Sotheby's and
Fancy.
Christie's. And I'd say I was long wanting to find something that felt a bit more frontline and for me, a bit more real. And at the time, I was sort of coping with that by volunteering a lot. So I was a Samaritan and I volunteered at my local hospice. And I just got to that point, which I think lots of us get to. For me, it was in my late 20s of thinking, this is just upside down. Like the stuff I care about the most is being squeezed into my free time. And so I knew I needed to do something. Knew I needed to make a big change, but I didn't know what it would be. And it wasn't like I went to a bad funeral or anybody particular died. We did go through some stuff in my family. So both my parents had cancer within 18 months of each other. And we just started having these conversations that we had not had. It's like, oh, this is real. What might be about to happen? And then actually what happened is there were 3 or 4 exposés on the funeral sector in 2011 showing just really horrible stuff. Just very, very poor treatment of people who died in the mortuary and really aggressive sales techniques for grieving people. And for me, it was not a light bulb, more like a fire.
Yeah, that injustice trigger gets lit up, right?
Big. And it's funny, isn't it, when I speak to people who are thinking about setting out on their own to do something brave, it's like, if you can get angry
that'll
about
fire you.
It really just generates so much courage to kind of push through. And I didn't have a really clear image for what I wanted to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do. And I think that's always really guided me. It's like, not that, not that, not that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a big campaign at the moment about bereavement support, which has been led by the powerhouse that is Caroline Booth, who's a widow, obviously. And she says herself, she was so angry and she had all this anger around the death of her husband as well. And she needed somewhere to put it. So it's fired her up into, taking on Parliament. And so you're right, you do need that sort of that desire to create a change, and that's what makes things happen. So how does one go about becoming a funeral director, Poppy? Did you go to funeral director school?
Well, the good and bad news is you can just start from scratch. You don't have to do any particular qualification to do it. So the good news is, for someone like me, it meant I could get cracking based on the skills I already had. And I went and spent a month with the funeral director sort of behind the scenes in the mortuary, because that was the piece of it where I felt really inexperienced and unsure whether that was what I wanted to do.
Scary as well, I'm saying scary, but there actually is nothing scary about a dead body, is there? That person is a body, but we're so conditioned to think of death and bodies as being scary and haunted and all the kind of connotations that come with that. So actually, by going behind the scenes, as it were, you kind of debunk a lot of those myths, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I this might sound crazy, but it's such a life
Mm,
experience. Like, it would be so helpful, I think, if it was like part of general studies, to go and have some shadowing time in a mortuary, because it's something that's just such a
yeah.
huge part of daily life. And I more and more think, the answer to the question, sort of like, why should I? Why should I engage with that subject when it's not relevant to me? I more and more think it's like, well, because then you can be of
Mm,
value when the people in your life are grieving. And I think one of the reasons that grief is so lonely is because just the majority of society don't want
yeah.
to engage with the
And you only know when,
subject.
when it
And
happens to you at a point where you're so low that finding a tribe and some solidarity out there can feel just like another hurdle to cross.
yeah, we should be
Yeah.
doing better for each other. It's just not. I spoke to somebody yesterday who said his wife had died quite young, and she'd died at home, and just completely spontaneously, friends started coming to the house and ended up having this sort of
Mm,
party in the house. She was lying in bed, she died, and they were one by one sort of going in and lying with her and talking to her, and he bumped into his neighbor, um, and said, we're having this gathering, would you like to come round? Because the neighbor had loved his wife, and his reaction was just like,
yeah.
absolutely not. If she's in the house, I'm absolutely not coming. And on the one hand, I have a lot of empathy for that person, but on the other hand, I just feel like we have to
Yeah.
do better than that
Yeah,
as a
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're not
community.
going to jump up and,
Um,
with the arms out, being a ghost as we see in cartoons, are we? That I think, I don't know. Maybe we all watched too much Scooby Doo as kids. Maybe that's ruined us.
I think we just haven't had the
Yeah.
experience. I think we're in this really weird, quite recent moment in time where death is completely hidden from view, and that's very, very recent in the grand arc of humanity, and it's really unhelpful. It's great that people are getting better healthcare. It's great that we get the treatment we get that can extend our life, but one of the downsides is that death happens often in
Hmm.
hospital, often hidden from view. And so we just have we're sort of like toddlers. Like, we just don't have any experience. We don't know the etiquette. We don't know how to support each other. And that is just deeply unhelpful. And again, I know this might sound mad, but it's like everybody should have seen someone who has died before their person
I've never
dies,
seen a
because
dead
then,
body, Poppy. Never.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
completely
and I am
normal. It's
45. I'm a
normal.
widow. I've lost all of my grandparents, but I've never seen a dead body. And I think that's something that's going to be quite shocking for me, perhaps, when it happens because of the time that's passed. I spoke to somebody recently and they had taken their children to see their late husband. And at first, you're kind of a bit like, oh wow, you did what? But as they explained the reasoning behind it, I thought, what a beautiful thing to do. Because one of the things that, I mean, it's particularly difficult for my children, but one of the things for children that's really challenging is that accepting that they're gone and they're not coming back. And by going in and seeing their body and enabling them to say goodbye, I mean, we're not talking about traumatic car crash, where they might actually look quite scary necessarily. But I'd never heard of people doing that. And I thought, actually, that's quite magical in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, we are all
Hmm.
mammals, and it's very, very helpful if we're trying to believe something that's hard to believe, that doesn't seem real. Seeing it is a very,
Yeah.
very helpful way to help us believe. Being told is also helpful, but I don't think I'm often struck by the people in my life who've died, who for whatever reason I couldn't get
Mhm.
back to see them, or even be at the funeral. Those are the people where I will walk down the street and think,
Yeah.
was
Is
that
that real? Yeah.
her? And then I'm like, oh no, she died, and so I don't know that children are so
Yeah.
different from us. I think we need to see to believe. And I think there are many ways of doing that. As you say, it's not something that people must do. But I think I'm often wondering how much of the reason that people don't have that experience is because they just find the funeral director really
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, and perhaps because it's
Do
not
you
an
know what I mean?
inverted commas the done thing. So a traditional
Yeah.
funeral director might look completely aghast at the idea or might not even, suggest the idea. Whereas if you're coming at this with a kind of a different, fresher perspective, is it something you would say? I mean, this is hypothetical, but say I was to come to you, my husband had died, and in this case there is a body for for ease, and I would you say to me, would the children like to see the body, or would that come from me?
So we would just
Yeah,
give you
yeah.
choices. We wouldn't assume anything, and remembering that the kind of art form of our job is that we're getting cues and clues all
Hmm.
the time. So from the first minute someone speaks to us, they will be communicating with us through words and body language, kind of what their priorities
Hmm.
are, what they're scared of. So we'd never push anyone into anything. So the way this almost always comes up is the question will be like, my children are struggling to come to terms with what's happened. Do you think it would help for them to see their dad? And we would say, it's completely up to you, but why don't we walk you through what that experience might feel like? And then you can make a decision about whether it's right. And I think this kind of black and white model isn't helpful that sometimes funeral directors present. So one of the things we might do if there was nerves is say, like, why don't you come in first, on Wednesday, and you can have the experience. And so you can be sort of prepared. And then why don't you spend the Wednesday afternoon reflecting on whether you think it would be good for them too, or come in with a friend and get that friend to sort of help you figure that out. So you don't have to choose between the impossible choices of A and B. We can find a sort of way through the middle where at the end of the day, you do what feels right for you. And other really interesting things too that I would just like to highlight, like the thing you just said about, obviously, if someone had died in really difficult circumstances, there's so much creativity. So I'm thinking of someone who died whose body was in a sort of challenging condition. And so we just wrapped them up in this like lovely natural cotton, and their hand happened to be in really good condition. So their hand was was just sort of laying across their body. And so the family did come in and could be with them and could, everyone recognizes their sort of like beloved's hand, and they could hold their hand and they could see the hand. So I don't think it's yes or no.
The real
it's like
adapting to the situation.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing as you're talking there, Poppy, is, and I've written down 2 words, and the 2 words I've written down are autonomy and time, because when you're widowed, and I can only really speak to that particular form of grief, is you feel like all of your autonomy gets stripped away. You become quite infantilized, lots of decisions are taken away, but at the same time, you're given a lot of decisions, and a lot of really big decisions. And you don't have the time to make them. You feel like you're being kind of hurried along. And, with a funeral, you are expected to make enormous decisions that will impact the way you grieve for the rest of your life, potentially. And you're expected to do that at a time when your world has just been shattered. And so to hear you say, that the time, go away and think about it, come and have this, it feels like a bit of a kind of a balm to hear it, just that sensitivity.
That's like music to my ears. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a weird, it's like someone's holding a stopwatch against grieving people. And one of the things we get to do is disrupt that, so often what's happened is there's been some, even if the death's expected, there is always obviously some sort of drama, or often in the run up to the death, in a sense of urgency and maybe pain management and things like that. And then it's quite common for the doctor to say, when they're verifying the death, is the funeral director coming? What's the next step? And then you might get family saying, when's the funeral? When's the funeral? When's the funeral? And one of the brilliant things we get to do is to completely respect timeframes. So there are people that call and say, I need the funeral done by Friday, and we'll work to that. But one of the things we get to say is, like, if there is no, like, the crisis is sort of over, the death has happened. If you now wanted to try and get a couple of nights sleep and we've got him. So like, we'll look after him. You could now go away for the weekend and turn off your phone and go to bed and watch TV and try and get some space. I know it's hard, but funerals don't have to happen within a particular time frame.
There's no legal requirement at all. That's interesting, isn't it?
No.
And I suppose traditions and faiths and different, beliefs will impact on that as well.
Yeah, and I think expectations of family and friends can be a hard thing to manage. You can feel pressurized, I think, by other people who have those expectations. But I think, we work very hard to try and get that autonomy back for people, and to have some sense of empowerment. Like, I am proactively choosing this thing because it feels right for me and my kids in this situation. Because it's not putting the pressure on, like, this is so important, don't get it wrong. But it's because we do know that if you feel like you did this the way you needed to do it, that is like a pillow upon which you can rest.
There's an element of I did it right, and we had a funeral for Ben, even though there wasn't a body, and we did it in a church. And I want to come back to the kind of religious aspects of funerals as well, but I'm not religious and Ben wasn't. But I went to look at a couple of venues and they felt more like wedding venues, and I thought, no, this needs the gravitas. I wanted like an old imposing church. I wanted that drama, if you like. And the vicar was a female vicar, and she was amazing. And I was very honest and candid. I said, we're not religious. And she was, she really respected that. But I don't think I understood how important it was to have that kind of almost public place to say goodbye, and how much of an impact it would make on me to see that sea of people there, all grieving alongside me, because We said earlier, grief is a very lonely, isolating place to be. And it's not often that you will be surrounded by, 100, 200, however many people it is, people who are experiencing it alongside with you. And I found it comforting. Yeah, no, comforting is the right word. And now I always make an effort, if I can, to go to a funeral, because not strangers, people I know, because it brings the grievers so much comfort to see how loved their person was. Well, actually, let's go on to the religious issue here. So, are funerals always religious? They're not, are they? No.
No, and people are becoming
Yeah.
less religious over time, is the sort of trend. Um, at Poppy's, we support everything. So we will do Orthodox funerals for people of Orthodox faith, people who are very religious, people who are a bit religious, people who just want the
Yeah.
Lord's Prayer, So it's about trying to find something that feels authentic
Yeah.
for you in this moment. One of the great challenges and wonderful stretches of our job is often you've got people who have competing needs.
Yes.
So I'm thinking of a family where the mum had died, she was Muslim, the dad was living, he was Hindu. The question was like,
Yes.
how do we have a funeral that reflects all of this richness? And that we sort of love
Yeah.
that kind of challenge. And it is possible to do it. You can do it within one ceremony. Another thing that I think people don't know that they should know is like, you can have more than one ceremony. So I'm thinking of a funeral we did where there were three
Oh,
separate
wow.
parts. Yeah. So that might be, the person I'm thinking of was quite a sort of well-known person. So there was going to be a very big public, quite formal funeral that was going to be quite restricted in how it could run. He had been a very vibrant person, so the family absolutely wanted a separate funeral that was like
Yeah.
colourful, friends and family. And then actually his mum had quite advanced dementia, and so she would have been overwhelmed by both. So we actually did a third thing, which was just
Oh,
her and him
don't.
and a priest. So it's like you can, and it's true also if you think of families where there might be, you know, two or three marriages
Mm.
with children from different, there's no reason why everybody has to come to one. We
I
can do
never
one
even
funeral that
thought of that,
reflects.
Poppy. 'Cause I've
Yeah.
been to a funeral a couple of years ago, and it was tragically a death by suicide. And there'd been a lot of there's been a split in the families, and so the grieving widow actually was not allowed to go to the wake, and it was all very unpleasant. And actually, I had no idea that you could have two funerals. I mean, how in the world we live in now, where lots of people are blended and set different relationships, that would be an incredible comfort, because you wouldn't have to sit next to your late husband's ex in the church, and it
Yeah.
adds that extra
Yeah.
kind of awkwardness and stress to a situation.
And I think acknowledging that, ideally we support
Mhm.
collaboration, and there are roads through where people can all get their needs met in one space, and that can be really special. But I think it's respecting the fact that if there has been sort of like decades of dispute, it's unlikely to get
Yeah.
resolved in the fortnight before the funeral, sort of quite the opposite. And so, this goes to other things too, like something that comes up, which is super upsetting, is if somebody has had a relationship, or maybe they're trans, and the birth family are not respecting
Mm-hmm.
of those realities, people can be sort of excluded in ways that don't feel right, and will have like lasting impact on their lives. So again, thinking, this is where you are at, how do we do this in a way that gives you both the space to have the experience you need to have? I guess that's how we view our role, is yes, we are putting this person in the ground, and there is like a very realistic sort of practical part to our job that we have to do beautifully, but we very much see our work as like this opportunity to have an experience that might be very, very helpful in the future. And a bit like a
Yeah.
birth, really. If you think about how our understanding of what happens around a birth has changed dramatically since
Mm-hmm.
I was born. My mum describes sort of like being sort of
Yeah,
shouted
flat
at
on
a
your
bit
back,
and told,
forceps out. Yeah.
do what you're told, and her view of like just getting out the hospital as
Mm.
soon as she possibly could. And certainly when I was pregnant, maybe I was lucky, but the midwives, there were so many questions, there were so many options, there was a real sense of like, for you and your partner to
Mm.
parent well, we can get a few experiences in place that will sort of set the tone. And that's very much what we're trying to do with
My first
funerals.
baby, I had him in Ashford, and there was a Canterbury in Kent. There's a birthing unit. It's actually closed now, I think, and you were able to go there and spend time with you, the baby, and your partner, and it was just gorgeous. It was so lovely. And then with my next two children, that service didn't exist, and it was kind of almost going back in time. It was have the baby off you fuck.
Yeah, and then the difference, right? The difference. I mean, it's not the same for everyone, but they say, don't they? It's like the skin on skin with the dad, and what happens if you get to breastfeed early rather than sort of wait for hours. And the research isn't there for death, but my experience shows me it's the same. The experiences people have around dying and death, for good and bad, stay with them basically
I
forever.
think people's discomfort around talking about death does stem from the fear of our own mortality, and this idea that if we don't talk about it, we don't have to be confronted by it.
Yeah, I've spent so many years wondering about this, like basically how much of the taboo is sort of like an evolutionary reality, because it's like I'm sure there's evidence of, like what, I don't know, but why do animals sort of go to a different place to die? Like, why do they choose to go somewhere else to die? Why in sort of ancient Egypt were people buried on one side of the river and then the community lived on the other side of the river? Like, there must be some inherent part of us that needs that separation in order to get on with our own lives. And that reminder that it is a very, very recent experience that we have sort of lost the ability to talk about death, kind of accept death as part of our fate and our lives, support each other when it happens, in the acknowledgement that it is the one reality that's coming to all of us. We've forgotten that very, very recently, and we can remember it very, very quickly if we want to. I was speaking to a group of people yesterday, and two stories come to mind. One was that, a woman, she had a natural burial for her dad, and it was in this like beautiful meadowland, and it was sort of like spring, and it was gorgeous, and there was like birds overhead, and she said every single person who came to the funeral was just like, I had no
Didn't know it could
idea
be
this was
done like
possible. Yeah. So it's like that's in their head, this is normal. And then someone else who was describing how she had not been allowed to go to her dad's funeral when he died when she was young, and that was
That's norm, wasn't it?
that was quite common in the last, I don't know, 50, 80 years maybe. But how when her mum died much later in life, when she had her own children, she took her children to spend time with her. They held her hand, they came to the funeral, they were tying messages to the coffin, and we were reflecting on that, how like in one generation their understanding of death has been completely transformed. And so it's that reminder that all it takes is for us to choose at dinner tonight to say, what would you want for your funeral? Or like, what music would you want? Or to turn to your kids and say, when you see a dead, magpie in the road, like, oh, look, that bird has died. Like, what's different about its body now that it's dead? We just have to be a bit curious and a bit open.
I think within my kind of widow community, one of the kind of bigger questions is, should children go to funerals? And I have to say, it's entirely personal choice, isn't it? Nobody knows your child better than you do. When it came to Ben's funeral, I did take the children. There wasn't, as I've said, there wasn't a physical body. So that kind of took away one of the, and again, I'm realising what I'm doing here. I'm going to say one of the scarier elements. So I'm still in that world of, oh, dead body's too scary for a child. But for us, it felt incredibly important that the children were involved. I think as much as anything, because they hadn't got to say goodbye. So they were there, and I know people that have brought their children along, and I know people that have made the decision to sort of shield them a little bit. And like I say, it's a very personal choice. But I felt that I'd rather they knew that they had been part of it, because we talk about our adult autonomy being stripped away. Well, the same is true of the children. A lot of decisions will be made, a lot of changes will be happening around them, and I think my kids are, say happy they were there, that's too far, but I think they're grateful that I made that choice. But you do feel at the time, is this a bit of a gamble? And it tended to be older generations that would be like, oh, are you sure they should be there? It's going to be terribly sad. I'm like, yeah, I know, that's the whole point. They need to be there. They need to see the sad. They need to sit in it for a little while, and that's the whole point of a funeral, right?
It is already sad.
Yeah, they're not going to make them more sad, are they?
Well, I think that's maybe some of that reflects some, other historic ideas about
Yeah, keep
emotion,
it locked
and
down.
whether you can just sort of like close it. If you don't express it, maybe it will
Wouldn't
go
that be nice,
away. And I
Poppy?
think we pretty clear now that's not how emotion works. Yeah, I'm trying not to be hardline about this because I want to be really open-minded, but I just cannot think of a scenario where it would help a child not to
Mm,
be at a funeral, because they are effectively being excluded from a community
mm,
event. So as they grow up, you would not exclude a child from a wedding. I mean, clearly lots of people don't want
your
children at
own
their weddings, but
children,
I
you
mean, like
wouldn't know.
your own children. It's like, what are you telling
Yeah,
them about what is happening in that
yeah.
space? And also, children react to their parents and the other adults. So I don't think a child walks into a funeral and thinks this is inherently petrifying. I think they are looking at the
Hmm.
adults' faces and saying, my mum is devastated. That is terrifying. And I think there's two bits there. I think actually the one reason I can imagine not wanting children at a funeral is because you as a parent may want to experience it for
Yes.
yourself. And you know that if you are in a caretaking role, you are not going to be able to feel it. Again, I think there are creative workarounds. So someone in my life whose husband died, at his huge funeral, they found someone who was willing to kind of like have a room of
Hmm.
children, so the point was the children could
Yes.
come and go. So she was sort of doing crafts in a side room, and it was just
Yeah.
such a genius thing, because it's like they were there in the stories and the memories of the day that people will tell forever. They were there, but they didn't have to sit quietly, or if it experientially felt too much, they could just go and like
So that's the other thing is, if you
paper
are a little
airplane.
wriggly child sitting in a church very still for an hour while the grown-ups cry, I mean, I'll say it's quite boring for them sometimes. I
Yeah.
had my brother and his girlfriend on hand, so my daughter was very little, so mum and dad helped me with her, and my middle child, my brother took out when it became too much. He's autistic, and I think it was just a crowd rather than the emotion. But my elder son, who was 8 at the time, we both spoke, and then we sat and we held each other while we sobbed. And I'm so glad that I experienced that with him. I'd rather not have experienced it at all. But it really was a shared moment of grief, and showing him that it's okay to break, it's okay to sob in front of people. This is fine. I'm pleased I did that. But I think you're right. I think, if your children are going to come, it's a really good idea to have somebody on standby to help you, perhaps have some activities
Definitely.
planned. One of Ben's university friends came, Adam, his name is, and he's a naughty boy, Poppy, and he bought a like a firework rocket, which they launched, and it got stuck on the church roof. So I'm very sorry, Hernhill Church.
But even that is a story that will go
Exactly.
down
And
in
then a
family
pizza van
history,
turned up because we had the wake in the pub opposite. And people were buying pizzas, and by this point everybody's quite well lubricated, and they're sharing stories. And that, to me, again, before I was bereaved, I found the concept of a wake quite strange. Like, what do you mean you go and you get drunk and you laugh and you chat? I couldn't comprehend that, but actually that's as important to, well, it was as important to me as the funeral itself, because you're in this kind of really tense, kind of heightened environment, and then you step outside, you breathe, oh, and then you have a little fun, which sounds so
Yeah.
counterintuitive, but it works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
decompression, isn't it? It's decompression. And I think, obviously, again, from individual to individual, people want different things. But if you look at what we have been doing for
Mm.
hundreds of years, and you see that almost always in almost every culture, that moment of basically returning to life is
Mm.
part of the ritual, that you come back to food, you come back to, sometimes alcohol, depending on the community, you come back to dancing, you come back to laughing, you come back to storytelling, that you are, it's not in any way like, well, that bit's over, but it's a symbolic sort of turning to face life
I heard
again.
that before, that
Um,
idea that you're coming back to life, and that's what it's. So I've never even thought of it that way. That makes an awful lot of sense. Maybe go get
yeah, and I think, well,
goosebumpy
it's something
actually.
like, I think it's we're in a funny time where as faith drops away, I guess one of the things that doesn't like worry me, but that I'm noticing is that I think sometimes people are dropping
Mm.
ritual because they are rejecting faith. And it's one of the things I always want to say loud and clear is, it's okay to not
Mhm.
have faith, but those, if you think of rituals as almost like stakes in the ground, it's like a bit of scaffolding that kind of helps us through. and then you look back at our history and you see how long we have been doing this for, it strikes me that it's clearly doing something for us. And you can do it however you want, but I think acknowledging that, having that kind of framework, having some kind of framework to guide you through might be quite helpful. And it tends to be like there's a moment of goodbye. It tends to be there's a moment of being together. And you said earlier, and it really struck me, that you looked around at the church and you felt that sea of people. And there's a new thing that people are doing more and more called direct cremation, which is basically like having a cremation without a funeral. And there are circumstances where that can be a very helpful service to have, like if there's no one to come or you're estranged from the person. But I think sometimes people are choosing it because they haven't been to any good funerals and they haven't felt that feeling of being held. And that makes me sad because I think everybody should have it.
Associated with, with that very dark church and the very somber, very God-heavy service, which perhaps they don't want for them or their person. So they're then thinking, well, it's that or nothing. Whereas actually what I'm learning today is that there's so many alternatives. Well, I mean, I don't know if you can pull this one out of your head right off on the spot, but most unusual that you've ever done. Put you on the spot there.
No, there's so many. And I think it's because everybody's so different. What's normal for one person is absolutely not normal for another. I mean, I'm thinking of a family we supported who their dad died on an island on the Thames. And so we went on a small boat to collect him. And when we got to the house, they started to tell a story about his beloved speedboat and how he'd wanted to go on it like one last time. And so again, we have this opportunity to sort of say, like, there's no rush if you wanted to make that last trip now. And so we basically got him onto the stretcher. He was all wrapped up in the stretcher, so you couldn't see him. He was all wrapped up in his stretcher. And basically they took him up the Thames. We just sat on the quay for like half an hour as they had this sort of final journey. But I'm also thinking of a funeral we did where the person who died had been very, very much estranged from everyone else in her life for the last few decades. She was somebody who really valued her solitude. And so her funeral was organised by a friend who was really unclear whether anyone would come. She'd been a psychotherapist, and basically all her clients showed up to her funeral. And what emerged, because they hadn't wanted a particular structure, basically it turned into this sort of like open mic. People just stood up and they just talked about her. I was really struck on that funeral by, I presumed that she might expect no one to come, and she might in her head think there wasn't a community around her.
And there they were.
And all these people who had, and they'd respected what she wanted, which was space, and they'd given that to her. And yet on her death, they sort of crowded into the room and had an awful lot to say about the role she played in their life. But so many things. I mean, people who have a horse and carriage, somebody wanted the horses to be dressed as unicorns, so we got these like unicorn horns.
Just making a note of that for my funeral, Poppy.
For sure. Like somebody who died who was like obsessed with their allotment, rather than having flowers on the coffin, we like arranged all their vegetables, and everybody took some vegetables home to make soup.
And much less wasteful than flowers, right?
Yeah, just lovely. So many lovely
I interviewed somebody very early on in the podcast, actually, a wonderful woman called Nikki Outlaw, who also had one of the best names I've ever spoken to. And she said to me in the interview, she said, oh, well, we had the Ghostbusters car that brought him to the funeral, and it played. And I was like, stop, wait a minute. You did what? And she sent me a video, and it was just incredible. This car pulls up, blasting out the Ghostbusters theme. And she just said it's so amazing. Inherently him. And, they hadn't talked about what they would want if one of them died, like so many of us don't. And I just thought, isn't that brilliant that you can do that? I would, again, you don't think of these things.
Well, and I think there's two things. One is like we could, I know it's hard, but we could spend a bit more time talking to each other about what would be right for ourselves, because it's a bit like not having a will. It does put people in a tricky position if we haven't had these discussions at all. And I think the other thing is a really good funeral director will kind of connect you with your intuition. So for people who don't know, or even people who think they know, a good funeral director, it's not like shopping in IKEA. It shouldn't just be putting a bunch of things in a basket from a catalogue. It should be this experience of helping people to understand what's possible and to then figure out what might be right for them, so that whether the funeral is super religious in that dark church, like if that's what's going to work for the congregation, then that's the
And
right
that's what I
funeral,
wanted, minus the religion. I wanted that austere, dark church. I wanted the gravitas.
to reflect the
Yeah, and
feeling.
I remember my mum messaging me, and she said, I hate to ask Rosie, but my friends are asking me, and again, I think that might be a generational thing. What should we wear? You know, do you want people in black? And I was adamant, yeah, I want people in black. I do for this, yeah. Whereas I went to the funeral of a child, actually, which I might ask you a little about that as well. Is, you know, how you manage doing things like funerals for children, and the mother was adamant she wanted everyone to wear yellow because it was his favourite colour, and the coffin was covered in yellow flowers, and that's making me go. That was a really emotional day, and it's again that is so personal to the person. So actually, while we're here, it's a horrible place to be, but let's just think a little bit about how you manage the death of a child and the different emotions that must come with meeting the parents of that child, and how different a funeral perhaps might be for them.
Yeah. I mean, it
I
happens,
know.
you know, it has always happened, and it
And it
still
feels
happens,
so
and it will
wrong. And we
continue to
even
happen.
talking about it, you're almost like, oh, dare I say it? Dare I say it? Because it just feels like such a taboo.
It is a taboo. But again, I take it back to like, it is happening to families. And so by talking about it, we are kind of having their backs, you know,
Yeah.
and kind of supporting them for what they're going through. Yeah, I think it's hugely dependent on context. So I'm thinking of a family we supported whose baby died when he was 6 months old, but they had known he would die when she was pregnant, and they were amazed he lived as long
So
as
that
he
becomes
did.
almost a celebration, I
And
guess, that they managed to.
yeah, it was desperately sad, but like they were coming at it from a very different place to a family I'm thinking of whose daughter, she died of
Oh my
chickenpox.
God.
She just died, and it was just absolutely awful. And that first family, I'm remembering, they were really present. They'd done lots of thinking already. They already knew where they wanted to bury him. The whole community knew this was coming. You know, that second family, I often reflect, like, I don't think they would remember meeting
Right. They
me.
were just
They
in the
were,
midst of it.
they were just so spaced out, you know, and I'm not sure how impactful the funeral might have been, because I don't know that they were able to take anything in, which is completely
Almost.
natural. So I think the first thing to say is, like, it's so dependent on what's happened in the run up. You know, I guess what we're good at is meeting people wherever they are at and being unafraid of standing by their side through the darkest things. And I think that is perhaps the greatest gift we can give people, is that we're not going to run away from their
No matter
reality,
how
you know,
ugly and scary it might seem.
and whatever their concerns are, you know, that a family that says, you know, because the questions become they're questions that can be very hard to hold if you're not used to holding them. Like, you know, a conversation with a family whose toddler died about, they don't want a hearse. They don't want his little body in the back of a giant black hearse. And so how can we get him to the funeral in a way that feels meaningful? And there's a woman we supported, a family we supported, and she's featured on our blog, who took her son to the funeral, like in a black cab, just with him like on her
No.
lap, you know, in
Imagine
his
the
little coffin.
conversation
Yeah,
with the
because
cab
what's a
driver.
better yeah, but like, what's a better, I mean, obviously he was
It was pre-warned, yeah, I
pre-warned, but
hope.
like, what's a better, why would you outsource the holding of your child to somebody
Yeah.
else in that last moment? It doesn't make any sense. Or, you know, one of the things that comes up a lot, which I resonates with me, is like, you know, I don't necessarily want my child going into like a mortuary. And so could we care for them at home? You know, do they have to go somewhere, or can they stay with us until the
And can
funeral
they?
and go straight to the funeral from our
Yeah.
house? Yeah, of course. You can keep someone cool at home, and that caretaking can be a kind of continuation of your love
Yeah.
and care, you know, for days or even, you know, some weeks afterwards. So yeah, I don't think we don't treat those families any differently to any other family. And I would make the point that, you know, devastation following a death can come. I'm thinking of someone we supported whose mum was like 101 when she died. You know, she had lived a very, very long life, but her daughter, who was in her 70s, had cared for her for like the last 20 years. It was her whole identity. They'd lived together as a pair, and the depth of loss was immense. And so you also just can't
No.
assume that one experience is worse than
No.
another.
Poppy, how do you look after yourself? Because you mentioned there that the questions that you're asked would be very difficult for somebody that wasn't experienced, but initially you weren't experienced. So how did you protect yourself during all of this?
such a great question. And if I almost start at the other end, which is like watching the
Yeah.
team now, you know, we're at a size and a scale now where our ability to sort of hold boundaries around ourselves, you know, we say if it's legal and possible, we'll do it. And we also have some really clear boundaries in place. You know, we getting burnt out doesn't
No.
serve anyone. And also when we're at the size of business we are now, the peer support thing
Yeah.
is immense, you know, so people do and can work from home, but what you tend to find in a business like Poppy's is people kind of want to be in, because you want to be by each other's sides. If you're having a challenging conversation, I see it all the time. Someone will be on the phone with someone and you can hear it's challenging. You can hear from their tone, and they'll put the phone down and it's like everybody swivels around on their chair and it's just like, well, you know, tell me, what do you need? So I think that's a huge
powerful
thing.
stuff.
Very powerful, which obviously I did not have at the beginning when I was sort of on my own. I mean, I think the truth is I didn't do a very good job at it. I think I probably am inherently I like the rescuing.
Yes.
You know, probably I've got some kind of
Rescue complex.
Freud would find some sort of hero complex in me, which I've come a long way with, and I'm doing much better now. But I think probably I got so much out of helping other people at the beginning, and actually probably the best thing that happened to me was I had 3 children, and so I was sort of forced to turn around and prioritize my family. And I think in prioritizing my family, had to take better care of myself. So I often think like, oh, if my kids hadn't come along, or another caring responsibility, I could have really fallen down that wormhole of kind of meeting other people's needs.
Yeah, because even doing this, which is, you know, by no means as demanding, I felt in the first year I was so intent on making sure that everybody felt held and supported, and I'd drive myself absolutely crackers, you know, thinking, oh, hang on a minute, that must be the anniversary of their death. Have I put that in my calendar? And it gets to a point where you start to think, actually, I'm losing myself in all of this. So it's, I guess, like therapists. I can't claim to be a therapist, but what you have to do is you have to close that laptop screen when you finish recording, or you finish the conversation, and then you put it out of your mind. It's not that you don't care. It's not that you don't desperately empathize, but you cannot hold everybody's pain and suffering yourself. You can't. It'll overwhelm you.
It doesn't serve them. It doesn't serve them for you to get overwhelmed. One other thing, back to ritual, which I guess is a word that, again, I'm annoyed that the word ritual's got so many like woo-woo connotations. Yeah, religious, or people who are like, I'm not spiritual, so ritual's not for me. And it's like, I think your morning cup of coffee is a ritual. You know, if you don't get your cup of coffee and you're annoyed, then that means it's a ritual. But one of the things I have practiced in the past is, I'm thinking of somebody who called me, a friend of a friend who called, you know, I was getting off my bike. I just arrived at home. My kids were inside. I was sort of at that moment of about to come through the door, and they'd sort of all leap on me. They were all quite small. And I got a call and I picked it up, and it was a guy I'd been on some like course with. And the first thing he said was like, I've just found out my brother's died by suicide and I just don't know what to do. And you're like outside your house, you can pretty much like see your kid in the living room, you know. And I was able to get away, and I basically spent half an hour kind of walking up and down the road talking to him. And I went into the house and I had this real sense of like, there was a blur. I mean, obviously what he's going through is awful, but like for myself. And then we needed to have another conversation in similar circumstances about a week later. And I basically went outside, I lit a candle, I sat on the doorstep, I had the conversation, I blew out the candle, and I came back in, and it was just like a completely different experience. And it doesn't have to be a candle, but exactly like you say, like closing the laptop screen is not just closing the laptop screen. It is a symbolic, like, done, I'm done. I need to stop.
And I'll often leave my laptop in the office, whereas normally I'll take it into the house and kind of go between the two. But I leave it here because I just think what I don't want to do is then go immediately into doing some more work. You have to kind of let it sit. And I find it quite much like I do a therapy session, actually. I feel quite tired afterwards. And I think that's also something that you have to respect, is how emotionally draining it is. But I love the idea of the candle, you know, that having, but that's a little ritual, right? It's a beginning and an end.
Yeah, totally. And it could be anything. It could be like doing 10 star jumps, you know, it could be, it could be closing your laptop screen, but also reflecting back at what you've just described, like, you know, what's different also for you is that you are doing this following your own very specific experience that also needs holding and honoring. And, you know, it's a cliche, isn't it? But it's like, you're holding all these people, who's holding you? And it's a little different for me because I didn't Yeah, great. But you
Yeah,
need more people
you
than
do.
that, right? We need more. And so what have you found other ways to, after that first year of experience, if you found other
Yeah,
ways
so
to,
things like I used to send every guest had a card designed. I used to handwrite the card. They had a little token with their episode number on that I'd sourced and had engraved with the logo. And I've stopped doing it. So sorry to everybody that didn't get one, but it just became it was an expense, which I'm completely independent, so the costs I have to keep an eye on my costs, and B, you think people don't know this was a thing. They're not going to miss it. So why am I breaking my neck? And it's not that I have any less respect or gratitude to them. It's just I have to realise that my time is limited. And things like, again, I listen, I record the episode, I go through it after edit, but I don't sit and listen to every episode back again because I've already listened. I've already been in that conversation. And if you think by the time you've listened, edited and listened back in, that's 3 times of sitting through that.
Yeah.
And actually it's unnecessary. It doesn't improve or benefit me or anybody else. So it's just about kind of figuring out what works. And, at one point I was doing 2 episodes a week. I don't do that anymore. I put out 1 a week. At one point I did 1 every other week because I really needed a break. And I've taken August off. I've got no bookings in August because I want to be mum for that month. And I want to, chauffeur my kids around, I imagine.
Yes. Serve
yeah, quite. So, Poppy, let's ask, how long have you been a funeral director?
So I launched Poppies in 2012.
Okay, going quite a while then, haven't you?
Years. Yeah,
and it was just you at the beginning, and now how many members of staff?
So there's just me at the beginning, and we're about 25
it's a bit different
now,
then, isn't
the
it?
team.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, and it's lovely. It's maybe particularly because of this work being kind of taboo. There's something particularly lovely, I think, about building your crew. That you have this bunch of people who are committed.
Do people react differently to you or strangely to you as a woman? I don't mean your team necessarily. I mean just as you're kind of going into this industry.
Yeah, I think having being a bit different, I think, can really serve you. So I think personally, I think my perspective on the work was very open-minded, and maybe that's partly being a woman. I think it's probably mostly just not having done the work before. So, and we've always felt that at Poppies, things that seem completely logical to us, that businesses that have been around for sort of 250 years don't feel able to do, or they're not sure it's sort of right. I think that's a real benefit. I think one of the things that's kind of interesting about doing this work is that even 14 years in, it continues to, the majority of people, I think, react like this is such a breath of fresh air. I've not really ever understood the work, but now you're describing what you do, I get why that's important. Maybe I thought it was like marching around with a cane and a top hat, or putting makeup on people who died, and that's not my thing. But now I understand it's more about, advocating for people at one of the trickiest times in their life. Like, that's a job I'd want to do. We still get the odd person. We had a meeting this morning and someone in the team was describing a reaction that someone had, a member of the public had to, like, we run these death cafes. So death cafes, this you probably know, but it's this amazing sort of global movement of opportunities to get together and talk about death and eat cake. And
what more could you want? It sounds right a bit of me.
Exactly. The cake piece is essential. But we run them in all our locations, and it's called Death Cafe, and we have an A board outside our shop, and it says, and you see people stopping, and they're interested and they're curious and they're taking photos, and they might pop in and be like, oh, this is wonderful. And just occasionally someone comes through the door and is like, I think this is disgraceful. I think they're really just upset to see the word death written outside, so I think that's okay.
Can you? That when I named the podcast, I knew that I would alienate a large proportion of the widow community, but there's plenty out there for them. You don't have to serve everybody.
And also that you're, by whatever your podcast was called, like that by talking about this stuff, you are also pushing up against something that people are resisting. And for some people, that creates a feeling of immense relief, like thank goodness someone's finally going for it. But for the people who are afraid, I think it can feel, I guess, an overused word, but triggering.
Perhaps a bit flippant
if they've had bad experiences. Maybe.
I did a picnic on Father's Day for members of the widow community. It wasn't hugely successful, Poppy, I'm not going to lie. But my daughter, it doesn't it, right? You'd think everybody would have come. But we had a nice day nonetheless. But my daughter, who's 8, wanted to call it the Dead Dad's Picnic. And I was like, oh, I do quite like that, Tabby, but I just don't know if I can go that far. So I didn't. But maybe that's where I went wrong. Maybe next year that's what I should call it.
Yeah, I think if you're feeling isolated in your experience, I mean, that's what I think the title of your podcast does, is it just sort of smashes that fragility or that rigidity
around there.
And there's something, an exhale, right? You feel that sort of exhale, which is helpful.
And how would you say things perhaps are changing within the world of funerals now? Because from what you've described, we are seeing a bit of a sea of change, the idea that children are perhaps coming along and people are able to make things much more personal. Are you able to talk a little bit about other changes that might be happening?
Yeah, there's some really good things, and then there's some really challenging things. Maybe I'll start with the challenging things and end on a positive note. So the challenging things are, funerals are often expensive, and they don't always have to be. But even if they are affordable, it's something that people have often not thought about, and they haven't necessarily got the funds. And these are really tough economic times for people. So that's something that kind of concerns me, is the idea of people getting into debt for a funeral just feels awful. Also, I think this move towards this direct cremation service is something that I just sort of keep an eye on. I mean, there's nothing to be done about it, but I'm concerned that people are choosing not to have funerals because they don't realise that funerals can be really powerful. And maybe some people are making those decisions for economic reasons.
Financial reasons as well. Yeah.
To do that is sort of cheaper. I think if you really want one and you've spoken to your family and they're all behind it, then that's great. What we see time and time and time again is people sort of buying something off the back of like some quite intense TV advertising, sort of daytime TV advertising. The person dies and the children didn't even know that's what they'd chosen. And then, much like COVID, not having a funeral and then spending months and years feeling like, we didn't get what we needed and we don't really know what to do now about that. I don't think it's ever too late.
You
as you say, you held a funeral anyway. You no reason not to, but people often don't sort of get round to it once the opportunity's passed. Some really wonderful things that are coming. So new choices for the body. So there is something called alkaline hydrolysis, or branded as water cremation. Yes. So already practiced in South Africa and America and some other countries. Desmond Tutu had it. And the body is basically put in a solution that breaks the body down. So it's very much like the kind of liquid equivalent of cremation. And it's somewhat environmentally friendly, and it's not currently practiced in the UK, but it should be in the next few years. Also, human composting. So there's some set of companies in America that are, the service that they provide is they can turn you into soil, basically. And so some people find that horrifying, and other people find that really
all turn into it anyway, don't we? If we're buried eventually.
We do. So I think that the sense of it is it can be quite a good sort of urban solution for people who maybe don't, for whom burial isn't an option, or and then the last bit, which is a bit dry but is really important, is the funeral sector is totally unregulated, and lots of the law around funerals is really out of date, and the Law Commission are doing a project at the moment to update the law so that some of the things that are happening stop happening. So this is a sort of anecdote, but it's true, that there are like thousands of sets of unclaimed ashes at crematoria and funeral directors sitting behind the scenes from like the 70s.
No way.
And it's like nobody really knows what to do with them.
What do you do with them?
Well, thank goodness the Law Commission are recommending basically for them to be returned to the crematorium from which they originally came and scattered on the ground, so that there is a record of where they are. Because what's happening is people are sort of imagining like some relative's going to come along in 30 years and want to know where the ashes were. And it's it's back to this sort of like the psychological reality, that I think when you're buried, there's a sense of like, well, that's an ending, you're in the ground. But when you're cremated, some people approach a cremation already knowing what they want to do with the ashes. I want the ashes scattered on the beach where I grew up or whatever. But for some people, that's just like, I sort of can't get to that.
Step,
I can't cope with that. Yeah, it's just another step that's like, or maybe, it's not urgent, so let's think of it. Or there might be a dispute in the family about what you want for your dad. So that's a sort of, sounds boring, but it's quite stressful if you're holding like 300 sets of ashes.
There's a lot of storage, right?
Since 1965. Yeah, it's just like, they're sort of precious. They're basically kind of like inert substance, sand. But on the other hand, they're precious to someone. Like, What do we
So
do?
can I just go back to the water cremation? So what do you get, like a bag of liquid? Like what do you end up with?
No, you get something a lot
Yeah.
like ashes. So if I maybe start
Hmm.
with cremation, because I think it's like when you explain a new method, it's like, whoa, that's all a bit real, but it's like, well, it's
Yeah, yeah,
already
yeah.
happening this way. It's just that we don't think about it. So when you're cremated, you stay in your coffin, you go into a sort of brick-lined chamber.
Yeah.
Imagine a kiln, basically, on your own. There's not lots of people in there,
Not a community
and because
event.
people have all sorts of things in their head about how it might be. So you go in, and it's very hot, and you get turned into, over about an hour and a half, sort of bone fragments, basically, that are very dry, obviously, because they've been in the fire. And then those bone fragments, some of them are like quite big still, go into this machine that basically uses ball bearings to kind of get you down to like ash format, which is a lot like sort of sand, basically, with some sort of little shale, maybe we'll say. So that's what happens with cremation. So what happens with alkaline hydrolysis is you are in a very similar size chamber, and the chamber, you're in a kind of biodegradable sort of shroud, and the chamber fills with 95% water and 5%, I now can't remember the name of the chemical that goes in. That's heated, and that basically sort of like dissolves you, and what's left are bones, and then the bones then need to be heated to get you to the point as you are with cremation, and then that's ground down too. So you end up after water cremation with a very similar
Thank you
substance.
for clarifying.
So
Had like the
people,
bags goldfish come in? I had sort of
yeah. No, that's why, again, we need to talk
yeah.
about this stuff, because it's like we think we don't want to know, but unfortunately, if we don't describe, our imagination goes to like a much worse
And
place.
what would the benefits be of this? You mentioned the environmental impact. Is it because with a cremation, are we putting out kind of a lot of, I don't know.
It's complicated because there isn't enough research in the funeral sector, like with everything, and it's all very much like six of one, half dozen of another. So to give you the most extreme, people assume natural burial is best, and it is. So if you have a natural burial ground at the bottom of your road, that is the
My
best way to
father-in-law
go
had a natural
environmentally.
burial, and it was beautiful. Actually, it was beautiful. We all stood out in this, what felt like an orchard, and the vicar came out. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was beautiful.
it can be gorgeous. So, but what can happen is, like, if the natural burial ground's 30 miles away and everyone's 50 people are driving there, then you've like neutralized the gain of
Of
choosing that as
course,
an
yeah.
environmentally friendly option. So cremation is assumed to be bad for the planet because it tends to use gas, and there can be emissions. But now lots of local authorities have transferred to electric cremators. There are all these new filtration systems that make sure that everything that shouldn't go up into the atmosphere doesn't. Water cremation is believed to be more environmentally friendly, but I don't think there's enough research to kind of prove it. So I think at this stage, it's just like, what feels
Another
right?
option.
What feels right? Yeah, people mostly are quite visceral, right? Some people are like, I don't want to be in the ground. Or people say, they're like, the last thing I want is to sort of be in the fire. So I think mostly this is quite an emotional
Yeah.
decision people make, or it might also be religious and cultural too.
So my mum's always said that she just wants to be lobbed into the sea off the back of a boat like a Viking. Obviously, I'm assuming she's joking, Poppy. We do need to have a conversation about this. But hypothetically, would you be allowed to do that? No.
No. So you can be buried at sea, but it's quite there's only like 3 places around the UK I think you can do it. It has to basically be off the back of like a big, because you have to be in a coffin that's then lined with
To
something
hold it
very heavy,
down.
so it definitely sinks. It's not as romantic as it sounds. Those people, there are so many people, I'm really interested. Is this a British thing of just like, just chuck me in a
Yeah.
skip?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
feels like
yeah.
a very British thing. And although I think it's hilarious, it's quite unhelpful for the people who are actually going to have to take charge of you. So it's like, could you just, I think what they're saying is
Yeah,
like, don't make a
don't. I mean, my
fuss.
mum said to me
I
the other
think that's
day,
what they're
because
saying.
tragically one of her very good friends has died recently, and she said to me, "We feel like we're in Sniper Alley," which really, because it's the
Oh,
four female friends, we call them the ladies, and 2 of them have died, and she just said to me, "Just don't grieve for me, Rosie. I've had a good life." And I thought, "Are you joking? Like, don't grieve. You can't say that, mother." But it is that, I don't know again whether it's a generational thing or a maternal thing where you're like, oh, it's fine. You don't need to worry about me. Even my own grandma, the night before my wedding to Ben, she was staying at my mum's house, and she said to my mum, she wasn't ill, by the way. She said, "If I die in the night, don't tell Rosie. Just let her go ahead with it." It's quite a hot day, Grandma.
It's sort of like it's
Yeah.
love, isn't it? It's acts of love. And I think I'm thinking that it's like that thing our parents might do of say, please don't grieve for me, or don't make a fuss, or it's a bit like a teenager saying like, I'm
Yeah.
fine, mum, like what's the
Yeah.
problem? I'm just going out with my mates. And it's like, yeah, but I'm still going to worry about
Yeah.
you because I'm your mum. Or like, I really appreciate that you're saying I've lived a good life, like don't drag out your grief on my behalf. It's like, yeah, but I will
Yeah.
be really sad because you're kind of like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
rock in
Yeah.
my
You're still
life.
my
So
mum, right?
yeah, and I think it is something I'd want to call out, that I think we've got ourselves to this funny position where people are sort of obsessed with legacy when it comes to how, if there's any money left over, like
Mm-hmm.
the estate will be divided, right? We're obsessed with like it needs to be fair and it needs to be organized, and like that ring's going to her, and like make sure that's fair for him. But we're not very good at the like
Mm-hmm.
emotional legacy of, you know, at all the practical legacy of like, have I cleared out my loft?
Mm.
You know, I think the greatest gift I could do for my children
A
before
good
I die is just
declutter.
like sort the
Yeah.
house out. Yeah. And to say, you know, maybe rather than saying don't make a fuss, we could say do what's right for
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
Just
I'll be
do what's
gone. I
right for
don't
you.
mind. You do what you
Yeah,
need to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever
And
that is. Yeah, and try and mine would be do what's right for you and try and not fall out with your siblings
yeah,
over
I've
this.
already said to Mike, so they were arguing over a piece of my jewelry, and I was like, I'm not going to specify who it's for. You can fight it out amongst yourselves, guys. Like, I won't be here. It won't be my problem. My parents have got this gorgeous vintage jukebox, and me and my brother, whenever we're there, we're just like, that's mine. That's mine. You're not having that. That's
Yeah,
mine.
yeah, yeah.
But you're right. My mum's done all the practical stuff. The wills are done and all that sort of stuff. But as a family, we do need to. And again, you know, you'd think I'd be quite comfortable with these conversations, but still, when it comes to the people I love, it's a lot harder to do. And I just did my own life insurance because, you know, even thinking about your own mortality, it's really scary. But I think what you're doing is just absolutely incredible, Poppy. I wish I'd known more about you earlier on. I hope people, you know, take from this conversation the knowledge that although we may have already buried the person that we love the most in the world, we are going to come across death more. It's, you know, it's one of the certainties of life, and having that kind of the courage to talk about it and the courage to make a plan or to, you know, because it doesn't need to be a formal, you know, request of what you want. You can jot
No.
it down in the back of an old diary or say it to somebody. And it is a conversation I wished I'd had with Ben. Ultimately, it wouldn't have made a difference because I didn't have any choice. But I always said that he probably would have been cremated and I probably would have put his ashes into the sea. So in a roundabout way, we got there, didn't we? The water cremation at its best.
Yeah, yeah, and I it's both things, isn't it? It's to say if you can just start the conversation. Maybe it's like take the pressure off thinking of some like final finished. It's not like doing a will necessarily. You don't need a document. You don't need the conversation to be done. I'd say almost try and introduce it as a subject in your friends and family to build on, you know, and to know in your heart that by doing that you will be offering everybody else like a
Gift.
huge opportunity, because it's in all of our heads.
Well, we
It just
know
is,
what
even if it's
funeral
wedged
song we
right at the
want, don't
back.
we?
Yeah, we do, and we certainly know what
Yeah.
we don't want, right? You go to a funeral and you're just like,
Yeah.
right, if anyone does that, I'm going to be livid.
Yeah. If anybody from my deep dark past turns up, don't let them in. You need a bodyguard on the door.
I saw an amazing thing on Instagram yesterday about like, you know, your sort of best friend is the person that would be at your funeral. And as certain people come through, that they'll be like, she didn't even
I think
like
I saw
you.
the same thing. Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah, and it's so true.
I love that. And I also wanted to shine that light back on you to say, you know, that all of us in our different ways are just cracking the window open a little bit for people and saying, you know, this has always been part of life. It will always be a part of life. And we are sort of signposting ourselves as people who are willing to have the conversation should others want to as well. And we can't force anyone, and we don't want to force anyone, but
It's there if you want it.
I think that's and it's such a gratifying bit of the work, isn't it? It's like you're just normalizing something.
Yeah, I've been really surprised. I mean, obviously, the majority of my listeners are widows or widowers, but there are quite a few people who aren't listening, and I think they get something from it because it's almost like a preparing you. You know, you're understanding a little bit more. And I bash this. This is not a scientific figure, but I always say, you know, if you're in a romantic relationship, you've got a roughly 50% chance of being widowed. So, you know, you need to have that conversation, and you need to. You know, nobody needs to kind of, you know, you don't need to revise for it like it's an exam, but some general idea of what's coming up the road would be incredibly helpful.
And the big one for me is like, and also so you can be available
Yeah.
to others, you know, that like I wonder how many of those people listening have a friend
Yeah,
who's widowed, or have a friend
I
who's
think
about to
so.
be widowed, or a child who's about to be
And
widowed. And
one of the things, in fact, there's a book by Stacey Hill. She's a widow as well, and it's called "Now Is Not the Time for Flowers." And it's that, before, if somebody had lost somebody, I would have sent flowers because that's what you do, right? But when the flowers started to arrive for Ben, I can remember the flower delivery lady. She was like, "I'm so sorry, there's another bunch," and I felt completely overwhelmed because these were just. I was grateful that people had thought of me, but I had to keep the flowers alive. That was another job. And in the end, my dad, there's an old folks home around the corner from where I used to live, and my dad took them around there, and they loved them. But it's things like you learning that actually sending food or paying for a cleaner or
cash. I mean, think of the cash
yeah,
that could have
and actually
generated.
that's what people really do need because as much as anything, we talk about the expense of a funeral. For me, it was the cost of we had a stone made, and it was when I found out how much they charge per letter. I was like, well, he's going to be
Oh
Ben,
God.
not Benjamin on here. There'll be no middle name.
Yeah, it's just so much of that is
Yeah,
so grim, and there are better people out there and there are worse people out there to support you. But at the end of the day, it's like you've just got to keep get jumping through these
you do.
ridiculous
Keep
hoops.
fucking
And
going. That's my mantra.
yeah,
Just keep going.
if it wasn't so awful,
Yeah,
it'd be
yeah. And
funny.
sometimes it
It's
is funny. And I think that's the other thing.
yeah,
Sometimes it's funny. And not
you
the
have to
death of a
laugh.
person, that's never funny, but the surrounding things, some of the things people say, some of the things you might do. Sometimes it's funny and that's okay. It's all right.
Yeah. Well,
You
you need
do.
relief, don't you? And you have to laugh at the way other people, you know, basically other people's
Yeah.
issues and assumptions, and the stuff that
Oh
comes
my
out of
God,
people's
I know.
mouths,
I feel like I
just
need to do like a
unthinkable.
post on Instagram or something and get people to tell me the most audacious things people have said to them in grief because I
You
want a
should do that.
collection of those things because I bet there's some absolute belters out there.
It's it's almost like I've seen it happen over and over again, and it's almost like some mad
Yeah.
panic is going on in
I might
people's
just say anything.
brains, and it's rather than just, oh, it's like you could have just stayed quiet. You could have just hug. I mean,
I'm
use
sorry
your
for your
body.
loss. That'll do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there were some
Yeah,
real
I'll just take, I'm
cliches,
sorry
but
for your
there were
loss. If you've
some.
got nothing else, if you don't know what to say, that will do. I
Mm,
mean, somebody said to my mum
mm.
at Ben's funeral, Rosie will meet somebody else. And my mum
Oh,
was like, for the love of God, don't say that to her.
could you just wait
Give
like
her a minute,
2 minutes?
eh?
Just give her a minute. And also, again, I'm not looking to overanalyze, but it's like that's what they need
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah, yeah.
think, because they're thinking about the alternative makes them so
Yeah.
sad that and it's like you can't just go round putting pressure on people to
Yeah.
be
Or
okay.
to
You
not be
have
okay, because it goes the other way as well,
that's the
doesn't
other
it?
thing.
Oh, hang on, you've met somebody else, that's far too quick. It's none of your bloody
Yeah,
business, is it? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And why are
Yeah,
you
why
so
do you care?
opinionated about this thing
Yeah,
that I'm going through? Your job is to like hug me,
yeah.
feed me,
Make me a
cheer
snack
for
and a cup of
me.
tea and possibly
Yeah,
put the bins out. I was very grateful for the
yeah,
friends that put the bins out. I hate that job. I know it's a cliche, but I hate that
yeah.
job.
That's what I'd like to see. I'd love to see us as a society becoming much more useful to people in our lives when
I
somebody
agree.
dies. And it's like you can be the person that puts the bins out. You can be the person that can have the emotional conversation. Like we need all
Yeah,
those people. Like everybody's got
yeah.
a skill that could be useful in the
One of the
community when
things I've
somebody
heard of
dies.
people doing, which I absolutely love, is a friend sets up a WhatsApp group with mutual friends in. The person who's grieving can be in it or not, it doesn't matter. And then all they have to do is message one person and say, I don't know, my tyres are flat. I don't know how to put air in my tyres. I've been there. I now do know, and I feel very empowered. But back then, I didn't have the headspace to learn anything new, even if it was
Yeah,
as simple as putting air in the tyres. And then people on the group chat say, "Oh, I can do that one." And that way, one person gets completely overwhelmed because that's the other thing. It's to be
yeah.
grief adjacent can be quite a heavy weight to carry. And I just think that's a genius idea. Although I'd be terrified I'd post something that would just be silence. Nobody wants to put your bins out.
No, I think people that's what's so sad is I think people do
Yeah,
want
they
to
do.
help.
And
They
they
just
need to
don't
know
know
what
where to
to do.
start. They're scared of getting it wrong. They're scared of saying the
And
wrong
people will say,
thing.
"Well, let me know if you
Yeah.
need anything," which is really well intentioned, but actually, it's much easier if there's okay, my husband's not working at the weekend. He said he'll come and service your car, or I can come and batch cook you a couple of meals. That sort of thing is much more helpful. But again, we don't know until we know.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, we can't wait until everyone's gone through it to
Yeah,
be
no,
good
we
at
can't.
this. It's like we have to We have to do better than that.
Oh, Poppy, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been really amazing to talk to somebody with that kind of slightly, like I said, like slightly adjacent to our world, and the compassion and the empathy that you're showing people. You know, I can only speak to my own tribe, the widowed tribe, and I just know what a difference having somebody like you in our corner would make, you know, in those really difficult days. So thank you ever so much for what you're doing for grieving people. It's just incredible, absolutely incredible.
Yeah, those words mean everything to me, and I feel the same about you. You know, I think what you're doing must be so impactful for people, both people who are going through it now, but I wonder that there might be people who this happened a long time ago and they didn't have you, but they can still have you now, and it's never too late.
I had a lovely comment come through, and she said, I wish you'd been around in the 80s when my dad died. My mum really needed it. And I think, oh God, we think it's hard now, but how much harder without podcasts, without social media, without WhatsApp groups. You know, they must have been very lonely. Anyway, I'm going to let you go. Poppy, just share, if you will, where people can find you.
Yeah, sure. So the website is poppysfunerals.co.uk. And we're on Instagram and other bits of social media at Poppy's Funerals. And I am Poppy_Mardell.
Lovely.
If you want to follow me personally.
Thank you so much. And for anybody listening out there, if you've been affected by today's episode, you know where to find me. It's widowed_AF, or the website is widowedaf.com. A big thanks to Poppy for being here today. And I will be back with you, as I always am, next week with another story from the forefront of widowhood. Take care of yourselves. It's goodbye. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you think someone else may benefit from this, please do share. We'd also really appreciate a quick review. It helps more people find the show. Thank you again, and see you next time on Widowed AF.